Imagine for a moment that life doesn't end when the body rests, but merely changes scenery. Now think with me. What if some choices we make every day were secretly building the path to a dark place, a territory of pain and regret called the Umbral? This is an uncomfortable but necessary question, because few have the courage to face this possibility. And that is precisely why this video exists. To open a window of understanding, bringing to light a teaching that is not new, but echoes from spiritual voices and the work of the notable medium, Edgar Cayce. You might be about to hear something that will change the way you see your daily actions. Many believe that the Umbral is a punishment imposed by higher forces, as if it were an automatic penalty for life's mistakes. But the truth is much more intimate and, in a way, even scarier. The Umbral is not a place we are sent to, but a reality we tune ourselves into. Just as a radio picks up a station according to its frequency, our mind and actions pick up the spiritual environment that best suits what we cultivate within ourselves. When Edgar Cayce spoke about vibrations, he wasn't just referring to a mystical concept, but to a natural law. What we feed in our heart becomes the spiritual address that awaits us. And here an inevitable question arises. If our spiritual destiny is shaped by our attitudes, which ones can drag us into this region of suffering? This is not about arbitrary lists or religious dogmas, but about consistent observations that cut across various spiritual traditions. These are seemingly small behaviors that, repeated and accumulated, create density around the soul. Think of a glass of water. A single drop of ink doesn't seem significant, but if you keep dropping it drop after drop, in a short time the entire glass will be dark. The same goes for the soul. Everyday acts shape a weight that becomes visible in the afterlife. When we talk about the Umbral, we are not talking about monsters or legends, but about human consciousnesses trapped in their own mental creations. People who in life fueled selfishness, anger, or indifference, and who after disincarnating find themselves immersed in those very same vibrations. It's as if the universe says, "Here is what you chose to cultivate." Divine justice doesn't need to intervene with punishments, because we ourselves imprison ourselves in the consequences of our choices. This is one of the central points that Cayce and so many other mediums sought to reveal. Life after death is continuity, not rupture. But there is something we need to clarify from the outset, so that you stay with me with an open mind. Talking about the Umbral is not an attempt to spread fear or manipulation, but to awaken consciousness. Fear paralyzes, but consciousness liberates. And when we understand what attitudes lead us to suffering, we also gain the power to transform them into attitudes that uplift us. Therefore, listen to every word not as a condemnation, but as a map for prevention. It's like receiving the blueprint of a house under construction. If the engineer shows flaws in the foundation, it's not to humiliate the builder, but to ensure the house doesn't collapse. Perhaps you are thinking, but can such simple acts like small outbursts of anger or moments of selfishness really be strong enough to pull me into such a dense spiritual region? The answer, unfortunately, is yes, not by the isolated act, but by habit. Cayce insisted that what shapes the soul's destiny is the constancy of choices. A repeated attitude forms character, and character defines vibration. It's not about judging isolated mistakes, but about recognizing that when we turn deviations into routine, we slowly build an invisible prison. And here's the point that troubles us most. Many who are in the Umbral today were not considered criminals or evil people in life. They were ordinary citizens, family parents, workers, people who, in the eyes of the world, seemed good enough. However, they carried unresolved grudges, silent envy, indifference to the pain of others within themselves. These invisible marks weighed more than appearances. It's uncomfortable to admit, but spiritual reality is more sensitive to what we hide than to what we show. Perhaps this is precisely what makes this video so important, because while we are alive, we have the opportunity to change course. If you are here listening carefully, you have already taken the first step, that of consciousness. Few have the courage to expose themselves to this type of reflection, because it is much easier to get distracted by the noises of material life. But spiritual life does not cease to exist just because we ignore it. Just as we don't see the air but breathe every instant, We also don't see the spiritual consequences of our attitudes, but we live within them all the time. Edgar Cayce used to say that every thought is a seed planted in the field of the soul, and that one day we will all be forced to harvest the tree that grew from these seeds. This simple metaphor translates a profound law. There is no escaping the harvest. If we sow kindness, we reap peace. If we sow resentment, we reap suffering. And the umbral is nothing more than an immense harvesting field for those who in life accumulated seeds of shadows. This is why we need to talk about the attitudes that lead us there, because there is still time to choose different seeds. Before we dive directly into the 10 attitudes that, according to spiritual tradition, can drag us to the umbral, it is essential that you remain open to reflect without judgment, because perhaps, at some point, you will identify with one or another of these attitudes. This does not mean that your destiny is already sealed. It just means that there is a warning to consider. True wisdom is not never making mistakes, but realizing in time where we are stumbling. Learning only happens when we have the courage to look at ourselves with sincerity. Therefore, throughout this video, I invite you to do more than just listen. Take mental pauses, think about your own attitudes, recall situations from your daily life. Don't turn this into an external list of prohibitions, but into a mirror. Because it is in honest reflection that transformation begins. The umbral is not inevitable, but it is a real possibility. And the only way to avoid it is to take responsibility for the seeds we plant in every gesture, in every word, and in every thought. Now that we have established this foundation, we can begin to unveil what these attitudes are that, often without realizing it, push us into darkness. But before going further, I want to ask you something very simple and important. If this reflection has made sense to you so far, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. This is not just a gesture of support for our work, but also a way to keep this knowledge alive, reaching other people who also need this alert. This is how the chain of light strengthens, a seemingly small gesture that, multiplied, transforms destinies. If you've made it this far, it's because something within you senses that this subject isn't just distant theory. It speaks directly to your life, your daily routine, your choices. And now is the time to get into the attitudes themselves, those that, when cultivated persistently, create a spiritual weight capable of leading us to the umbral. Remember, we are not talking about isolated slips, but about patterns that become part of our way of being. The first attitude is pride. It often seems harmless, even elegant, when associated with self-esteem. But there is a fine line between self-respect and the arrogance that places us above others. Pride closes doors because it prevents the humility to acknowledge mistakes and learn. It creates a barrier that distances us from others and consequently from the greater law of love. On the spiritual plane, proud souls feel as if trapped in invisible walls, unable to connect with the help that would surround them, precisely because they believe they don't need it. Pride is like a prison built by the mind itself. The second attitude is selfishness. More than a character flaw, selfishness is a distorted view of life. It makes us believe that everything revolves around our needs, that others exist as extras in our plot. This behavior disconnects us from the universal current of solidarity, because to refuse to share is to refuse to participate in life itself in its fullness. In the umbral, the selfish person encounters this multiplied loneliness. Surrounded by others who also haven't learned to give, they feel immersed in a deep void. It is the price of refusing to open up to others. The third attitude is cultivated anger. We all feel irritation at certain times, but there is a difference between a fleeting impulse and the deliberate choice to hold a grudge. Accumulated anger transforms into silent hatred, which corrodes the soul from within. Think of metal slowly rusting. From a distance it looks firm, but inside it is already fragile. Such is the soul dominated by anger. Upon disincarnating, it finds environments compatible with this state, dense regions where resentment is the common language. The fourth attitude is envy. This is a subtle poison, because it is rarely confessed. Envy arises when we cannot bear the happiness of others, when someone else's brilliance bothers us. It is a symptom that we have not yet learned to recognize our own worth. Envious spirits, upon leaving the body, often wander tormented, not for lack of opportunities, but for the inability to rejoice in any achievement, their own or others. In the umbral, envy becomes a constant torment, because there will always be someone more illuminated to serve as a painful mirror. The fifth attitude is indifference. It may seem less serious than hatred or envy, but perhaps it is even more dangerous. To be indifferent is to refuse to see the pain of others, to live as if the suffering of others were unimportant. This spiritual coldness creates a shield around the heart, which on the spiritual plane manifests as deep isolation. Indifferent spirits feel like shadows wandering aimlessly, because in life they refuse the most essential connection, compassion. The sixth attitude is lying. Lying is not just distorting words, it is distorting one's very essence. Those who live in lies create a mask that sooner or later crumbles, and when that happens, the soul sees itself naked before itself. In the umbral, spirits who cultivated falsehood suffer from the incessant revelation of their own distorted image, as if they were before broken mirrors reflecting disconnected pieces of what they once were. Truth, however painful, liberates. Lies, however comfortable, imprison. The seventh attitude is addiction in its various forms. We are not just talking about substances, but about any compulsion that enslaves the will, gambling, pleasure, power, consumption. Addiction is dangerous because it removes the spirit's autonomy. It makes us dependent on something external to fill internal voids. Upon disincarnating, the addict often desperately seeks sensations that they can no longer satisfy, and this insatiable hunger traps them in dense regions where others share the same craving. Addiction creates chains that cross death. The eighth attitude is the abuse of power. Every time someone uses their position, strength, or influence to subjugate others, they plant seeds of suffering. This can be a boss who humiliates employees, a parent who oppresses children, or even someone who manipulates affections for personal gain. This behavior creates spiritual debts that are difficult to break. In the umbral, many of these spirits relive the scenes of abuse, but now from the other side, feeling the pain they caused. It is the law of return acting without the need for external tribunals. The ninth attitude is hopelessness. Living without faith, without believing in anything beyond matter, may seem like an intellectual choice, but it is often an inner prison. Hopelessness leads us to see life as an accident without purpose, and death as an absolute end. This existential void generates a deep weight, because the soul, upon awakening in the afterlife, finds itself surrounded by a reality it denied. Many spirits are trapped in the umbral not out of wickedness, but because they cannot accept that they still exist, that life continues. And the 10th attitude is resistance to forgiveness. Holding grudges, harboring resentments, refusing to release another from an emotional debt is perhaps one of the greatest causes of spiritual suffering. Forgiveness is not just a favor to others, it is a liberation for ourselves. In the umbral, those who have not forgiven feel eternally trapped in scenes of pain, as if life were a tape that never stops repeating. Forgiveness is the key that opens the door to evolution. Without it, we remain imprisoned in our own emotional prison. These 10 attitudes are not isolated inventions or arbitrary rules. They are reflections of universal laws observed by Cayce and countless mediums throughout the centuries. Each one represents a deviation from what elevates us: humility, generosity, serenity, contentment, compassion, truth, balance, responsibility, faith, and forgiveness. When we stray from these virtues, we create shadows that accompany us beyond death. But there is something you need to engrave deeply. The umbral is not eternal. It is a school, a hospital, a place of treatment. No one stays there forever. The duration depends on our willingness to change. Spirits who awaken to repentance, who sincerely wish to transform their attitudes, are gradually rescued. The problem is that many resist, remaining clinging to the same patterns that led them there. It's like a sick person who refuses to take medicine, and here's the good news: while still alive, we can begin this treatment. Recognizing these attitudes in ourselves is already the first step. Because the true spiritual revolution doesn't happen at the moment of death, but in everyday life, when we choose to forgive instead of harboring resentment, when we decide to share instead of accumulate, when we choose to be truthful instead of building masks. These are small choices, repeated consistently, that change the destiny of the soul. If you are reflecting and realize that some of these attitudes still dwell within you, do not see this as condemnation, but as an opportunity. Physical life is a blessing precisely because it gives us the chance to start over every day. And every time you choose differently, you are in a way writing a new page in the book of your spiritual destiny. The umbral can be avoided not with grand heroic gestures, but with daily, silent, consistent changes. And in recognizing this, we also perceive the value of responsibility. No one else can live our lives for us. There is no way to outsource spiritual choices. We can receive advice, study books, watch videos, but in the end, everything boils down to how we apply this within ourselves. This is the true freedom that has been given to us, to build with every attitude the environment in which we will live here and beyond. Now that we have uncovered the attitudes that can drag us to the umbral, a question naturally arises that echoes in the hearts of those who follow this reflection. If I have already recognized some of these traits in myself, is there still time to change? The answer is clear and liberating. Yes, there is always time. No spiritual destiny is definitive because the very purpose of life is transformation. But it is necessary to understand how this process works, so that it is not just a vague desire, but a concrete practice capable of modifying the soul's vibration. The first key is consciousness. Without it, we live like sleepwalkers, repeating patterns without realizing it. Consciousness is like turning on the light in a dark room. Suddenly, we see the accumulated mess and understand that it has always been there. This revelation can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Edgar Cayce said that no treatment begins without a diagnosis. Likewise, no spirit begins its regeneration without first recognizing what needs to be healed. This means that the discomfort you may feel now is not a sign of failure, but of awakening. The second key is responsibility. It is common for us to attribute our failures to external factors, the family that didn't understand us, the circumstances that limited us, the people who hurt us. While these factors influence, they do not determine. Responsibility is the point where we stop pointing fingers and start asking, what can I do with what happened? This change in attitude breaks the cycle of victimhood and opens space for conscious action. On the spiritual plane, responsibility is synonymous with freedom. The more we take command of our choices, the less we become hostages to circumstances. The third key is constant effort. Many fall into the illusion of expecting sudden, almost magical changes. But the soul does not transform by instant decrees, but by training, repetition, constancy. Think of someone who wants to strengthen their body. One trip to the gym is not enough, but continuous practice. The same applies to the soul. Every time we choose to forgive, even when it is difficult, every time we decide to be truthful, even when it is uncomfortable, every time we strive to look at others with compassion, even when indifference would be easier, we are strengthening our spirit. These small choices accumulated change the frequency we emit and therefore the destiny that awaits us. And here it is important to clear up a common misconception. Changing does not mean becoming a perfect person, free from flaws. That is impossible at our current stage. Changing means above all not being complicit in our own shadows. It means not accepting that they dominate us without a fight. Even when we fall, true transformation is shown in the willingness to get up and try again. It is this perseverance that, on the spiritual plane, opens doors for relief and elevation. But perhaps you are wondering, what about those who have already departed with these ingrained attitudes, condemned to the umbral? This is where we need to look at spiritual life with broader eyes. The umbral, as we have already mentioned, is not eternal punishment but a learning process. Spirits who suffer in these regions always have access to the support of luminous entities, but only receive this help when they show a willingness to change. This is a crucial detail. The outstretched hand from above is always present, but it needs to find a hand willing to rise. Many remain longer in the umbral not because God abandons them, but because they insist on mentally repeating the same attitudes that led them there. This law also applies to us while incarnated. Every day we receive subtle invitations to change, advice from a friend, a passage from a book, an intuition during silence, even a video like this one. These invitations are signs that spiritual help is already happening. But the choice to respond to these signs is ours alone. Transformation does not occur through imposition, but through decision. An important aspect revealed by Cayce and so many other mediums is the power of thought. We often believe that only actions have weight, but constant thoughts shape as much as, or even more. This is because action first arises in the mind. A lifetime of negative, hostile, or selfish thoughts creates an atmosphere around the soul that becomes compatible with the umbral. On the other hand, cultivating thoughts of kindness, gratitude, and hope generates a lighter vibration that connects us with higher planes. It is not about forcing artificial optimism, but about exercising a broader view of life, capable of seeing possibilities for growth even in difficulties. This inner work of watching thoughts and feelings may seem abstract, but it has concrete effects. People who cultivate serenity and compassion not only prepare for a higher spiritual life, but also transform the physical environment in which they live. Anyone who has lived with someone truly peaceful knows how much that presence conveys balance. This influence, silent and powerful, is a form of charity that often goes unnoticed, but which has enormous value for the spirit. Another essential point is to understand that no one changes alone. We are collective, interdependent beings. Living with others is in fact the laboratory of the soul. It is in relationships that our shadows are revealed and also where we have the chance to practice virtues. Therefore, challenges in coexistence should not be seen as punishments, but as opportunities. Every difficult person in our path is, in a way, a mirror or an instructor, showing us what we still need to work on within ourselves. The umbral is full of spirits who have not learned this lesson, who rejected the invitations of coexistence and preferred to isolate themselves in selfishness. But if up to now we have spoken of prevention, we also need to speak of cure. What can be done in a practical way to begin neutralizing the negative seeds already planted? The answer is simple but demanding: charity. Not just material charity, but charity in all forms. Listening to someone, extending a comforting word, forgiving an offense, offering a sincere smile. Every gesture of charity is like a spiritual antidote that neutralizes the density accumulated by negative attitudes. Cayce emphasized that there is no greater spiritual cure than love in action. And it is precisely this point that connects us to the great revelation. The umbral is not a threat but a warning. It exists not to condemn us, but to show us the consequences of choices. It's like a road sign on a dangerous road. Those who ignore it are at risk. Those who consider it adjust their path and proceed safely. The same applies to spiritual life. When we know the attitudes that lead us to the umbral, we gain the chance to choose different routes, lighter, more luminous ones. If you have felt during this reflection the weight of perceiving flaws in yourself, do not be discouraged. That weight is precisely proof that you are awake. Indifference would be the real danger. One who feels guilt or regret is already in a state of transformation. The next step is to channel that feeling into action, to start today, not tomorrow, to choose different attitudes. And here's a practical reminder: don't wait for grandiose situations to practice good. The training ground is everyday life. It's in traffic, when someone cuts you off and you choose serenity instead of anger. It's in the workplace, when the chance arises to support instead of criticize. It's in the family, when you decide to listen instead of imposing. These seemingly small moments are the true spiritual exercises. They shape our vibration more than we imagine. And if there is still doubt about the importance of these choices, remember that on the spiritual plane, we do not carry titles, possessions, or appearances. We carry only what we truly are. The umbral does not recognize masks, but only essences. Therefore, the most important work of life is not in accumulating external achievements, but in refining the inner self. This is the only inheritance we carry beyond death. As we reach this point in the reflection, it is essential to go a step further, to understand how knowledge about the umbral should be transformed into daily practice. It is useless to know what attitudes drag us into darkness if we do not translate this awareness into real choices. It's like someone who receives a map indicating dangerous areas of a city. Merely looking at the map does not guarantee safety. It is necessary to use it to guide one's steps. The same applies to the soul's journey. The first practical exercise is vigilance. Vigilance does not mean living in constant tension, as if we were policing every thought, but rather developing attention to what we feel and think. How many times do we catch ourselves criticizing someone without realizing it, harboring an old resentment, or secretly wishing for another person's failure? These internal movements are subtle but revealing. Vigilance is the moment when, instead of letting these impulses run wild, we stop and ask, where is this coming from? Is it worth nourishing this feeling? This simple act of questioning already creates a crack of freedom. The second exercise is discipline. Without it, vigilance becomes intermittent and easily forgotten. Discipline here is not related to rigidity, but to constancy. It can be setting aside a few minutes each day for prayer, meditation, or uplifting reading. It can be maintaining the habit of giving thanks before sleeping. Small rituals create spiritual anchors that remind us day after day where we want to be vibrating. Without discipline, spiritual life becomes like a rudderless boat at the mercy of emotional currents. The third exercise is acting kindly. Vigilance and discipline prepare the ground, but it is action that plants new seeds. Good deeds don't need to be grand to be transformative. A visit to someone lonely, a meal offered, a word of encouragement, a sincere hug. Each gesture is a seed that germinates in the heart of both the receiver and the giver. Edgar Cayce affirmed that the soul heals when it puts itself at service, because by helping others, we awaken the highest part of ourselves. But there is still a delicate point: self-compassion. Many people, upon realizing their own flaws, plunge into excessive guilt. This guilt, instead of healing, paralyzes. It's as if someone realized they took the wrong path and instead of returning, stayed still, lamenting their mistake. Self-compassion is understanding that we are all in a process, that there is no perfect soul in an earthly stage. What matters is not never making mistakes, but deciding to start over as many times as necessary. The umbral is not a consequence of isolated failures, but of giving up on trying to change. Another essential aspect is the understanding of time. We often underestimate the strength of a habit because we don't see immediate results. It's like planting a tree. The fruits don't appear the next day, but with each silent watering, the root deepens. Spiritual life works the same way. It may seem difficult at first to forgive, cultivate serenity, or detach from selfishness. But with every effort, however small, something within us transforms. And when we least expect it, we look back and realize how far we've come. And if we speak of time, we must also speak of patience. Patience with oneself and with others. How many times do we demand from others what we have not yet managed to practice ourselves? How many times do we severely judge attitudes that, in another context, perhaps we would also have had? Patience is recognizing that each person is on their own rhythm of learning. This does not mean accepting abuse or injustice, but rather not harboring resentment in the face of others' faults. Remember, on the spiritual plane, impatience translates as intolerance, and intolerance is one of the doors that lead to the isolation of the umbral. Another powerful exercise is silence. We live in a world of noise, where at all times we are bombarded by opinions, demands, information. But silence, when practiced consciously, connects us with the deepest dimension of the soul. It is there that we hear intuition, that gentle voice we often ignore. Edgar Cayce affirmed that intuition is the language of the soul, and that learning to listen to it is one of the greatest defenses against spiritual falls. Silence is not emptiness, it is space for the soul to express itself. But perhaps the most important point of all is forgiveness. We have already spoken of it as an attitude that, when absent, imprisons. Now we need to speak of forgiveness as a practice that liberates. Forgiving is not forgetting what happened, nor justifying the other's mistake. It is simply deciding not to carry the weight of resentment anymore. Imagine someone walking with a heavy stone on their back. Forgiveness is letting go of that stone, even if the path still has challenges. Many spirits remain trapped in the umbral because they cannot let go of these stones. Here in physical life, we have the chance to practice this detachment every day. There is also a collective aspect to this transformation. The umbral is inhabited not only by isolated individuals, but by groups of spirits who share the same vices and pains. This means that our choices affect not only our destiny, but also the destiny of those who live with us. When we choose to cultivate peace instead of anger, we are positively influencing our family, our circle of friends, even our workplaces. The opposite is also true. When we nurture shadows, we spread density around us. Ultimately, every choice is a contribution to building a lighter or darker world. Therefore, when we talk about avoiding the umbral, we are not just talking about saving ourselves. We are talking about collaborating with all humanity. Every act of kindness is a brick in the construction of a lighter planet, and this is perhaps the greatest mission of those who awaken to spiritual reality. To understand that we are not here just for our individual evolution, but to participate in collective evolution. And so we come to a conclusion that may seem paradoxical. The fear of the umbral by itself does not transform anyone. What truly transforms is love. Fear can even alert us, but it is love that moves us. Love for life, for others, for ourselves, for God. It is this love that illuminates our thoughts, softens our words, and inspires our attitudes. Love is the highest frequency, the one that no shadow can resist. If you perceive that this topic has deeply affected you, that it has awakened important reflections, I invite you now to strengthen this movement. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. It may seem like a simple gesture, but every time you support this work, you are helping to spread seeds of light that can prevent unnecessary suffering in so many lives. It is an act of digital charity, and its importance goes far beyond what the eyes can measure. And remember, talking about the umbral is not talking about condemnation, but about choice. Every day is a new chance to choose different attitudes, to plant better seeds, to transform our destiny. The umbral exists, yes, but not as an inevitable threat, but as a warning for us to awaken. The decision is always in our hands.